Good evening, and welcome, wherever you are right now. However the day has treated you, I'm glad you found your way here. Tonight we're going to do something that almost no one does anymore. We're going to go down, slowly, into the dark, and we're going to take our time about it. Not the dark of a closed room or a switched-off lamp, but an older darkness than that. A darkness that has been waiting under your feet for longer than there have been eyes to be blinded by it. We're going to talk about caves. Not the way an adventure story talks about them, all torches and danger and breathless escape, but the way the earth itself seems to keep them, patiently, in silence, across spans of time so long that the word ancient hardly begins to cover it. Because beneath the surface of the world, beneath the soil and the roots and the foundations of everything we've built, there is another world entirely, a world of hollows and passages, of chambers vast enough to hold cathedrals, of rooms no human eye has ever seen and perhaps never will. And that world has a history, a long, secret, slow-moving history, written in stone and water and the absence of light. Before we begin our descent, I want you to settle. There's no hurry tonight. We have hours, and we'll use them gently. Let your shoulders drop a little from wherever they're holding. Let your breathing find its own slow rhythm, the kind it falls into all on its own when you stop paying attention to it. You don't need to follow every detail. You don't need to remember anything. If your mind drifts away from my voice and into sleep, that's exactly what's meant to happen. The cave will still be here. It's in no rush, and neither are we. I wonder where you're listening from tonight. Perhaps you're somewhere warm, the lights low, the world outside already quiet. Perhaps it's raining where you are, or perhaps the night is still and clear. It's a curious thing, isn't it, that you and I can meet here in this gentle space, while just beneath us, beneath whatever floor you're resting on, the rock holds its hollows and its silence the way it has for ages beyond counting. We live our whole lives on the thin surface of things, rarely thinking about what lies below. Tonight we'll think about it together, softly, the way you might turn over a smooth stone in your hand before setting it down again. If you find these slow journeys soothing, you might consider staying with us for more of them. A quiet like, or a subscribe if it suits you, helps others find their way to this little corner of calm, but only if it feels right. There's no pressure here, no urgency, nothing to do but rest and listen and let the descent carry you down into sleep. So let's take that first step together, not as explorers racing toward discovery, but as travelers, with all the time in the world, walking toward the mouth of the cave as the light begins, slowly, to fade behind us. Imagine standing at the entrance, not a dramatic one, not a gaping black throat in a cliff face, but something quieter, a low opening at the base of a hill, half hidden by ferns and moss, where a cool breath of air drifts out to meet you. That breath is the first thing you notice. It's steady, and it's cool, and it carries a faint mineral smell, like wet stone and old water. The cave is breathing. It does this all the time, this slow exchange of air between the underground and the surface, driven by differences in temperature and pressure between the world below and the world above. On a warm day, the cave exhales its cool, even air. On a cold day, it draws the outside in. It has been breathing like this, in and out, season after season, for longer than the hill above it has worn its present shape. You step closer, and the temperature shifts. The warmth of the day falls away from your skin, replaced by something constant and mild, neither hot nor cold. This is one of the first secrets of caves, and one of the gentlest. Deep underground, away from the entrance, the temperature barely changes at all. It hovers, year-round, close to the average annual temperature of the region above, while the surface world swings between summer and winter, between scorching afternoons and freezing nights. The cave holds its breath at a single steady value. Step deep enough into almost any cave on Earth, and you step into a kind of eternal mildness, an unchanging climate that knows nothing of the seasons turning overhead. For the creatures that live there, and we'll meet some of them later, this constancy is everything. It's a world without weather. But before we go deeper, let's pause at the very idea of a cave. What is it? really. At its simplest, a cave is just a hollow, a space where there is no rock, surrounded by rock where there is, an absence defined entirely by what's around it. And yet that absence can be one of the most extraordinary spaces on the planet. The strict definition that geologists use is a natural opening in the ground large enough for a human to enter. By that measure, the earth is riddled with them, honeycombed beneath its surface in numbers we can't fully count, because so many of them have no opening to the outside at all. They are sealed, hollows with no door, holding their darkness in perfect isolation, waiting, sometimes for millions of years, for a passage to break through and let the air find them at last. There's something almost tender in that thought. Beneath the ground you walk on, beneath the cities and the forests and the seas, there are rooms that have never been entered, spaces shaped over unimaginable stretches of time by the slow and patient work of water, sitting in absolute darkness and absolute silence, complete and finished and unseen. The world is full of secrets, but few are kept as faithfully as these. Now, how does such a hollow come to be? How does solid rock, the very symbol of permanence and strength, become a space, an emptiness, a room? The answer is one of the slowest and most beautiful processes in all of nature, and it begins, as so many things do, with water and with patience. Most of the great caves of the world, the ones with the long winding passages and the soaring chambers and the delicate stone formations, are carved out of a particular kind of rock, limestone. And to understand caves, we have to understand limestone. And to understand limestone, we have to go back, far back, to the bottom of an ancient sea. Limestone is, in a sense, a graveyard. It's made almost entirely of the remains of living things. Hundreds of millions of years ago, in warm, shallow oceans, countless tiny creatures lived and died. Corals, shellfish, plankton, and other organisms with hard parts built from calcium carbonate. When they died, their shells and skeletons drifted down to the seafloor and settled there in vast quantities. Layer upon layer, over millions of years, these remains piled up, compacted under their own weight, and slowly hardened into rock. The white cliffs, the pale stone of so many quarries and buildings, the bedrock beneath so much of the world, all of it began as the bodies of sea creatures, accumulated grain by grain at the bottom of oceans that vanished long ago. When you look at limestone, you're looking at deep time made solid. You're looking at the patient work of an ancient sea. And here is the crucial thing about limestone, the thing that makes caves possible. It can dissolve. Calcium carbonate, the mineral it's made of, is vulnerable to acid. Not strong acid, not anything dramatic, just the faint, mild acidity of ordinary rainwater. As rain falls through the air, it absorbs a little carbon dioxide, and as it soaks into the soil, it absorbs much more, because soil is rich with carbon dioxide produced by roots and by the decay of plants. This carbon dioxide dissolves into the water and forms a weak acid, carbonic acid, the same gentle acid that gives sparkling water its faint bite. It's so weak you could drink it without noticing. And yet, given enough time, given thousands and millions of years, this mild, almost imperceptible acid can hollow out the heart of a mountain. Think about how slow that is. A drop of water, faintly acidic, seeps down through a tiny crack in the limestone. As it goes, it dissolves an almost invisible amount of the rock, carrying a few atoms of calcium away with it. Then another drop follows the same path and dissolves a little more. The crack widens, atom by atom, year by year. At first, it's nothing, a hairline fracture no wider than a thread. But water always finds the easiest path, and once a path begins to open, more water follows it, and the dissolving accelerates. Over tens of thousands of years, the thread becomes a channel. The channel becomes a tube. The tube becomes a passage you could crawl through, then walk through, then stand in with room to spare above your head. The rock is not broken or blasted away. It's removed, molecule by molecule, dissolved into the water, and carried off into the dark. leaving behind a space where solid stone used to be. This is the heart of it, the secret at the center of nearly every great cave. Caves are not really carved, they are dissolved. They are the slow subtraction of stone by water, the patient erasure of rock, one atom at a time. And because the process is so slow, the caves we explore today are almost always very old. The passages took ages to form, ages we can barely hold in our minds. A chamber large enough to walk through might represent 100,000 years of dripping, seeping, dissolving water. The cave is a record of all that time. It's time you can stand inside. Geologists have a name for landscapes shaped by this kind of dissolving. They call it karst. The word comes from a rugged limestone region near the border of Italy and Slovenia, a place of sinkholes and disappearing rivers and hidden underground drainage. And once you learn to see karst, you find it all over the world. It has a particular look on the surface. The ground is pocked with sinkholes, round depressions where the rock has dissolved away beneath the soil and the surface has slumped downward. Rivers behave strangely in karst country. They flow along happily and then simply vanish, pouring into a hole in the ground and disappearing underground, sometimes to emerge again miles away as a spring. The whole landscape is plumbed, drained from below, its water running through hidden passages we never see. To walk across karst is to walk across a roof. Beneath you, the rock is full of holes. In some places, this plumbing becomes vast. Whole river systems run underground, flowing through caves carved by their own patient work, fed by the water sinking down from the surface above. The water enters as rain, soaks into the soil, gathers into trickles. The trickles join into underground streams. The streams carve their passages deeper and wider, and eventually, the water finds its way back to the surface, emerging from a spring at the foot of a hill, often perfectly clear and cold, having filtered slowly through the stone. It's a complete and hidden water cycle, running parallel to the visible one, doing its quiet work in the dark. There's a rhythm to all of this that suits the hour. The dissolving of limestone is among the slowest sculpting forces on the planet. There's no drama to it, no sudden collapse or violent change, just the endless, gentle persistence of water finding its way down through stone. A single passage might take longer to form than our entire species has existed. The chambers we walk through were begun before the first cities, before the first farms, before the first humans looked up at the stars and wondered. They were old when everything we know was young, and they're still forming now, still growing, drop by drop, in the silent dark beneath us, while we sleep and wake and live our brief lives on the surface above. Now, not every cave is born this way. Limestone caves are the most common and the most spectacular, but the earth has other ways of making hollows, and each one has its own quiet story. Let me take you through a few of them, gently, because they show how many different patient processes can arrive at the same end: a space in the rock, a room in the dark. Some caves are born of fire. When a volcano erupts and sends rivers of molten lava flowing across the land, something curious can happen. The surface of the lava flow, exposed to the air, cools and hardens first, forming a crust. But beneath that crust, the lava is still hot and still flowing, insulated by the hardened shell above it. The molten rock keeps moving through this tube, draining away downhill, and when the eruption finally ends and the supply of lava stops, the still liquid rock inside drains out entirely, leaving behind a hollow tube, a lava tube, a cave made not by removing rock slowly with water, but by the rock flowing out and leaving its own mold behind. You can walk through these tubes in volcanic regions around the world, smooth-walled passages with rippled floors where the last of the lava cooled in place. Some of them stretch for miles. They formed in a matter of days or weeks, a different kind of speed entirely, but the silence inside them now is the same silence you find in the oldest limestone halls. Some caves are born of the sea. Along rocky coastlines, the relentless work of waves slams water against the cliffs, day after day, year after year. Where the rock has a weakness, a crack or a softer layer, or a fault line, the waves exploit it, hammering and pounding, forcing air and water into the gap with tremendous pressure, breaking the rock apart piece by piece. Over time, a sea cave opens in the cliff, a hollow carved by the patient violence of the ocean. These caves echo with the boom and hiss of the waves, filling and emptying with the tides, their walls slick and dark. They are younger than the great limestone caves, and they change more quickly, because the sea is a restless sculptor. But they belong to the same family of hidden hollows, and standing in one, as the tide breathes in and out, you feel the same sense of being inside the earth's slow work. Some caves are born of ice. In glaciers, the slow-moving rivers of ice that grind through mountain valleys, meltwater carves channels and tunnels through and beneath the ice itself. These glacier caves are walls of blue, translucent ice, glowing with light that has filtered down through the frozen mass above. They are among the most beautiful and most fragile of all caves, because the ice that forms them is always moving, always melting and reforming, so that a glacier cave might exist for only a few seasons before it shifts and closes and a new one opens elsewhere. They are caves that come and go, here for a moment in geological time, gone before the limestone caves have aged a single noticeable day. And some caves are born in stranger ways still. There are caves dissolved not by carbonic acid, but by sulfuric acid, formed deep underground where rising gases meet water, and we'll come back to those, because their story is one of the most surprising in all of speleology. There are sea caves and lava tubes, and glacier caves and fracture caves, formed where the ground simply cracks and shifts. There are caves in sandstone and in gypsum and in salt, each made by water finding the particular weakness of a particular stone. The earth, it turns out, has a great many ways of holding empty space inside itself. But whatever way a cave is born, once it exists, it becomes a vessel for the same things: darkness, silence, stillness, and time. So let's go back to our limestone cave, the one we left at the entrance, breathing its cool breath out into the ferns. Let's go deeper now, slowly, and pay attention to how the world changes as we descend, because a cave is not a single uniform place. It has zones, regions, each with its own character, each defined by how much of the surface world still reaches it. And the most important variable, the one that shapes everything, is light. At the entrance, you're still in the world you know. Sunlight pours in. Plants grow, mosses and ferns and the occasional small tree leaning toward the opening. Birds might nest in the shelter of the overhang. The air still carries the temperature of the day. This is the entrance zone, and it belongs as much to the surface as to the underground. It's a threshold, a place of transition, where the two worlds overlap. Walk a little farther, and the light begins to fail. Not suddenly, but gradually, dimming as the entrance falls behind you, and the passage curves away from the daylight. This is the twilight zone, sometimes called the threshold, or the entrance zone proper. Here the light is weak and gray, enough to see by, but not enough for most plants to survive. The temperature begins to even out, settling toward that constant underground value. The sounds of the surface fade. You can still tell day from night here, still feel the faint pulse of the outside world, but it's distant now, muffled, like a memory of light rather than light itself. Creatures that need a little of both worlds live here, animals that shelter in the cave but venture out to feed, bats and certain insects and small mammals that use the entrance as a refuge. Keep going, and you cross a boundary that has no exact line but is unmistakable when you pass it. The last of the gray light fades behind you. Turn a corner, and there is nothing. Not dimness, not shadow, but true and total darkness. This is the dark zone, the deep cave, the real heart of the underground world. And it's a kind of darkness that almost no human being in the modern world ever truly experiences. We live awash in light. Even our darkest nights have stars, the glow of distant towns, the faint luminescence of the sky itself. But here, deep in the cave, with no source of light at all, the darkness is complete and perfect. Hold your hand in front of your face, and you will not see it. There is no difference between your eyes open and your eyes closed. The darkness is absolute, total, older than eyes, the natural state of the deep earth, which has known light only in the rarest and briefest of moments across its entire vast history. There's something to dwell on there, gently, as you rest. The inside of the earth is dark, not metaphorically, but truly and simply dark. And it has been dark forever. The light we know, the sunlight that fills our days and shapes our lives, is a surface phenomenon, a thin, bright skin over a planet whose interior has never seen it. The caves are the places where that interior darkness comes closest to the surface, where you can stand within the Earth's own ancient night. And in that darkness, in the deep zone, the temperature is steady, the air is still, and the silence, as we'll see, is unlike any silence you've ever known. But the dark zone is not empty. That's one of the things that makes it so remarkable. Even here, in perfect darkness, where no plant can grow and no sunlight has ever reached, the cave is being shaped, decorated, transformed by the same patient water that hollowed it out. Because the water that dissolves limestone on its way down does something extraordinary when it finally drips into the open air of a cave. It builds. This is one of the great quiet wonders of the underground world, and I want to take our time with it, because it's beautiful and because it's slow. And slow, beautiful things are exactly what this hour is for. Picture a single drop of water, somewhere far above the cave, soaking down through the soil and the rock. As it travels, it dissolves limestone, taking calcium carbonate into itself, becoming saturated with dissolved stone. Eventually, this drop reaches the ceiling of a cave chamber, a hollow space full of air. And here something changes. When the drop emerges into the air of the cave, it loses some of its carbon dioxide to that air, the way a fizzy drink goes flat. And when it loses that carbon dioxide, it can no longer hold all the dissolved limestone it was carrying. So a tiny amount of that limestone comes out of the water and is left behind, deposited as a microscopic ring of mineral on the cave ceiling, right where the drop hangs. Then the drop falls, and another drop follows, and leaves its own tiny ring. And another. Each one adds an almost invisible layer of mineral, building, ring upon ring, downward from the ceiling. Slowly, impossibly slowly, a structure begins to grow. A thin tube of stone, hollow at first, hanging from the roof of the cave. Water runs down through the center of the tube and drips from its tip, extending it grain by grain. This is a stalactite, and it grows from the ceiling, holding tight to the rock above, reaching down toward the floor with a patience that defies imagination. The rate of growth is often a fraction of a millimeter a year. A stalactite, the length of your arm, might represent tens of thousands of years of dripping water. To grow a great column from floor to ceiling can take longer than human civilization has existed. And below the stalactite, where the drops fall and strike the floor, the same process happens in reverse. Each falling drop carries a little dissolved limestone, and each one leaves a little behind where it lands, building upward this time, mounding slowly into a thicker, rounder formation rising from the floor. This is a stalagmite, growing up from the ground, reaching toward the ceiling, mirroring the stalactite above it. And if you wait long enough, far longer than any human could ever wait, the two will meet, the stalactite descending and the stalagmite ascending, growing toward each other across the dark for thousands upon thousands of years, until at last they touch and fuse into a single, unbroken column of stone, a pillar built entirely of water and time, and the slow patience of dissolved limestone returning to solid form. There's an old way to remember which is which. The stalactite holds tight to the ceiling. The stalagmite might one day reach the top. It's a small thing, but I find it pleasant. The idea that even in the dark, these formations are reaching for each other. The one hanging on above, the other striving up from below, both of them taking ages beyond counting to close the gap. But stalactites and stalagmites are only the beginning. The deep cave, given enough time and the right flow of water, becomes a gallery of forms so varied and strange that early explorers struggled to find words for them. There are draperies, sheets of stone that hang from the ceiling in folds like fabric, formed where water runs down a sloping surface instead of dripping from a single point, depositing its mineral in thin, translucent curtains that can be banded with color. Layers of cream and amber and rust laid down as the chemistry of the water shifted across the centuries. Hold a light behind one and it glows, the stone thin enough to let the light through, marbled with the record of ages. There are flow stones, broad, smooth expanses of mineral that coat the walls and floors where water has spread out in a thin film, building up over time into surfaces like frozen waterfalls, cascades of stone that seem caught in mid-motion, though their motion is measured in millimeters per millennium. There are rimstone pools where water collects in shallow basins and deposits its mineral around the edges, building up natural dams that hold still, clear pools in stepped terraces, each one brimming and spilling gently into the next. The water in these pools can be so clear and so still that it becomes invisible, and explorers have stepped into them, thinking they were dry stone, the surface betrayed only by the faintest ripple. There are formations called soda straws, the thin hollow tubes that are the very beginning of a stalactite, fragile as glass, sometimes growing several feet long, perfectly straight, hanging in clusters from the ceiling like a strange inverted forest. There are helictites, and these are among the most baffling of all, twisting formations that seem to defy gravity, curling and branching in impossible directions, growing sideways and upward and in spirals, formed by water moving through tiny pores, and pushed by forces so subtle that the stone seems to grow according to no rule at all, like coral, like the branching of frost on a window, beautiful and chaotic and slow. There are cave pearls, smooth round spheres of mineral that form in shallow pools, where dripping water keeps them gently turning, coating them layer by layer, the way an oyster coats a pearl, until they sit in their little nests of stone, polished and round, made entirely by the patient agitation of falling water. There is moon milk, a soft white paste of fine mineral crystals that coats some cave walls, cool and damp to the touch, glowing faintly in the lamplight, its formation still not fully understood, perhaps involving the work of microbes living in the dark. There is cave popcorn, knobby clusters of small rounded growths that bumble across the walls. There are crystals, in some caves, grown to extraordinary sizes, in conditions of perfect stillness and constant temperature, blades and beams of translucent mineral that fill entire chambers, formed over hundreds of thousands of years in water saturated with dissolved minerals, undisturbed, unhurried, growing in the dark toward a perfection no one would ever see. When you take all of this together, the stalactites and stalagmites and columns, the draperies and flowstones and rimstone pools, the soda straws and helictites and pearls and crystals, you begin to understand what a deep cave really is. It's not a barren hole in the ground. It's a slowly built work of natural architecture, decorated over geological time by the steady, patient hand of water, in a darkness that never lifts, with no one to see it. Every formation is a clock. Every layer is a record of the water and the chemistry and the climate of the moment it was laid down. The cave keeps growing whether or not anyone ever enters it, building its quiet ornaments in the dark, a cathedral that builds itself, one drop at a time, across ages that make our lifetimes seem like the briefest flicker. And the water that does all this building is itself part of a hidden world worth lingering on. We tend to think of rivers as things on the surface, bright ribbons winding through valleys, catching the sun. But in karst country, much of the water has gone underground. It flows through the caves, carving and dissolving and building, running through passages it has made for itself, sometimes in trickles, sometimes in roaring torrents that fill entire chambers floor to ceiling in times of flood. There are rivers in the dark that no sunlight has ever touched, flowing through stone canyons of their own making, plunging down waterfalls into pools no one has ever measured, running on through the rock toward an exit they will find sooner or later, somewhere far away, at a spring on a distant hillside. These underground rivers behave by their own logic. A surface stream might sink into the ground at one point, vanish entirely, travel for miles through the hidden passages of a cave system, and then reappear, sometimes much later and much lower, at a resurgence where the water finally rises back into the light. For centuries, people wondered where these vanishing rivers went. They would pour dyes into a sinking stream and watch for the color to appear at distant springs, mapping by trial and patience the invisible courses of water through the rock. And what they found was a hole concealed plumbing, the earth drained from within, the limestone shot through with channels carrying water in directions that often have nothing to do with the lay of the land above. The surface might slope one way while the hidden water runs the other, following the dissolved passages, taking the path the stone has opened for it over the long ages. There's a particular zone in this underground water world that shapes the caves profoundly, and it's worth understanding gently. Below a certain depth, the rock is completely saturated with water. All the pores and cracks and passages below this level are full, flooded, submerged. The top of this saturated region is called the water table. Above it, in the zone where air and water mix, water moves downward by gravity, dripping and trickling and seeking the lowest path. This is where the dripstone formations grow, in the air-filled passages, where water can emerge into open space and deposit its mineral. Below the water table, everything is underwater, and the caves there are flooded, drowned passages where the dissolving happens differently, where the water moves more slowly and the chemistry shifts. As the water table rises and falls over geological time, following the changing climate and the slow lifting and settling of the land, the caves record these movements. A passage that is dry today, full of stalactites, might once have been a flooded river canyon. A drowned tunnel today might once have been an airy hall. The cave holds the memory of all these changes, written in its shapes and its formations, a layered record of where the water stood across the ages. And in these flooded passages, in the dark water below the table, there is a frontier that remains one of the least explored places on Earth. Underwater caves, sumps where the passage dips below the water and continues on, flooded, into the unknown. Divers venture into these places at enormous risk, swimming through submerged tunnels in absolute darkness, following guidelines back toward the air, exploring rooms and passages that have been underwater since they formed. Some of the longest and deepest caves known have been mapped this way, meter by meter, by people moving through black water in a silence and stillness that the rest of us can scarcely imagine. There are surely vast underwater cave systems still entirely undiscovered, flooded labyrinths beneath the limestone regions of the world, holding their water and their darkness exactly as they have for ages, waiting, perhaps forever, to be found. And all that hidden water, all those underground rivers and flooded passages, eventually give something back to the surface. And it's worth pausing on this gift, because it connects the dark world below to the lives of people above in a way that's easy to overlook. When the water that has traveled through the caves finally returns to the light, it emerges as a spring, and the springs that rise from limestone country are among the purest and most reliable sources of water in the world. The water has been filtered through the stone, slowly, over its long underground journey, cleansed and cooled and clarified, so that it comes out clear and cold and clean, often in great volume, welling up from the foot of a hill or bursting from the side of a valley, where the underground river meets the surface at last. Whole towns and cities, across the ages, have grown up around such springs, depending on the water that the hidden caves deliver to them, drinking from a source whose true origin lies far back in the dark, in passages no one has ever seen, in the slow, patient plumbing of the limestone. There's something quietly beautiful in that. The water you might drink in such a place fell as rain on a distant hillside, soaked down into the soil, dissolved its slow way through the limestone, traveled for miles through the lightless passages of a cave system, perhaps for years, filtering and cooling as it went, and then rose again into the light, clear and cold, to be gathered and drunk by people who never think about the dark journey it made. The cave gives this gift freely, endlessly, the way it does everything, without being asked, without being seen, the hidden water rising back into the world to sustain the life that depends on it. The bright surface and the dark depths are not separate. They are joined by the water, always moving between them, falling as rain, sinking into the dark, rising again as springs, in an endless quiet circulation that links the lighted world we know to the silent world below. And the surface itself bears the marks of all this hidden water, if you know how to read them. In limestone country, the land tells the story of the caves beneath it. There are the sinkholes we mentioned, round depressions where the rock has dissolved away below and the surface has slumped gently downward, sometimes filling with water to make still ponds, sometimes opening suddenly where a cave roof has finally given way after ages of thinning. There are the places where streams vanish into the ground, pouring into a swallow hole and disappearing entirely, leaving a dry valley below that the water no longer fills. There are the springs where the water returns, and the strange dry valleys, and the scattered hollows and depressions that mark the slow collapse and dissolving of the rock beneath. To learn to see karst is to learn to see the surface as a thin skin over a hollow and watery world, to read in the gentle dimples and depressions of the land the signature of the caves below, the slow, patient work of dissolving stone made visible at last on the surface. Living on karst has always had a particular quality because of this, a sense of the ground being less solid than it seems, rivers that come and go, land that can settle and slump as the rock dissolves beneath it, water that behaves by hidden rules, appearing and vanishing according to the logic of passages no one can see. People who have lived in such country for generations come to know its ways, to understand that the visible landscape is only half the story, that beneath their fields and roads and homes there is another landscape entirely, a dark one, full of water and hollows and slow movement, shaping the surface from below. It's a gentle reminder of how much lies beneath the surface of things, how much of the world goes on out of sight, how the ground we trust as solid is, in these places, threaded through with darkness and water and ancient empty space. Let me linger, too, on the sounds of the underground, because while we spoke of the great silence of the deep cave, the cave is not always silent, and its sounds are among the most soothing in all of nature. Where water moves, the cave has a voice, and it's a gentle one, a music made entirely of water and stone. There is the sound of dripping, the single most characteristic sound of a cave, the soft, steady plink of a drop falling from a stalactite into a pool, repeated at long, patient intervals, each drop the same as the last, marking time in the dark with a rhythm older than any clock. In a chamber where many formations drip, the sounds layer and overlap, a scattering of soft falling notes at different pitches, some high and bright where the drops fall into shallow water, some low and full where they fall into deep pools, a slow, gentle music with no melody and no end, the cave playing itself in the dark, drop by drop, forever. There is the sound of moving water, where an underground stream runs through a passage, a soft, continuous murmur, rising and falling as the water passes over stone, swelling to a quiet roar where it tumbles down a hidden waterfall, fading to a whisper where it spreads out thin across a chamber floor. There is the sound of water working its slow way through cracks and channels, trickling and seeping, the faint background music of the cave's endless making and unmaking, and these sounds carry strangely in the dark, in the still air, echoing and reflecting off the curved stone surfaces, so that a single drip might seem to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the whole dark space with its soft, repeated note. To rest in such a place, in the dark, with the slow music of falling water all around you, is one of the deepest forms of peace the underground offers. A lullaby of stone and water, patient and endless, with no urgency in it at all. It's a good sound to carry toward sleep, that slow, patient drip, that soft murmur of hidden water. The cave has been making these sounds for ages, in the dark, with no one to hear them, the water falling and flowing and seeping, the gentle music going on and on in the silent depths, indifferent to whether any ear receives it. And tonight, in your mind, you can hear it, that soft and steady dripping in the dark, marking the slow, patient time of the cave, falling drop by drop into still black pools, the oldest and gentlest music in the world, going on beneath everything, in the deep, quiet hollows of the earth. Now I want to take you somewhere that surprises almost everyone who learns about it for the first time. Because if I asked you what lives in the deep, dark zone of a cave, in that perfect, lightless world where no plant can grow, you might reasonably say nothing. How could anything live there? Life as we usually understand it depends on the sun. Plants capture sunlight and turn it into food, and everything else, directly or indirectly, eats the plants or eats the things that eat the plants. The whole great web of life on the surface hangs from sunlight, and in the deep cave, there is no sunlight at all. There has never been any. So surely it must be dead, empty, sterile. And yet it is not. Life has found its way even here, into the perpetual dark, and the creatures that live in caves are among the strangest and most specialized on the planet. Scientists divide cave life into a few groups, gently overlapping. There are the animals that use caves but don't depend on them, that come and go between the underground and the surface. Bats are the most famous of these, roosting in caves by the millions in some places, sheltering in the dark by day and pouring out at dusk to feed in the world above, returning before dawn. They bring the surface world's energy down into the cave with them, in a way we'll come back to. There are the animals that live in caves and could live elsewhere but often don't. Certain spiders and insects and amphibians that favor the cool, stable, sheltered conditions. And then there are the true cave dwellers, the ones that have lived underground for so many generations that they can no longer survive anywhere else. These are the creatures that have been shaped, body and being, by the dark. When a species lives in total darkness for long enough, across countless generations, something remarkable happens to it. The features it no longer needs begin, slowly, to fade away. Eyes are the most striking example. In the dark, eyes are useless. They cost energy to build and maintain, and they offer nothing in return where there is no light to see by. So over the generations, cave creatures tend to lose them. Their eyes shrink, become covered with skin, disappear entirely. A cave fish might have only faint dimples where eyes once were, or nothing at all. And along with the eyes goes color. Pigment, too, is pointless in the dark, where there is nothing to see and no sunlight to protect against. So cave creatures often turn pale, ghostly, translucent. Their bodies the soft white or faint pink of flesh, with no need for color, sometimes so transparent you can see the workings of their insides through their skin. But while they lose what they don't need, they gain what they do. With no eyes to rely on, cave creatures develop other senses to an extraordinary degree. They grow long, delicate antennae and feelers, sensitive to the faintest touch and the slightest movement in the water or the air. They develop the ability to sense vibrations, pressure, chemical traces, the texture of the world around them in ways we can barely imagine. A blind cave fish navigates its lightless world with a precision that seeing fish in the bright surface waters can't match, reading the currents and the contours of its home through senses we don't possess. They are not impaired by their blindness. They are exquisitely adapted to a world where sight would be no use at all. They have traded the sense we prize above all others for senses suited to the dark, and they thrive. There is a creature in the caves of Europe that captures all of this perfectly. A pale, blind, eel-like amphibian called the olm. It lives in the underground waters of limestone caves, ghostly white, with feathery red gills, tiny, useless eyes hidden beneath its skin, and a life lived entirely in darkness. The olm can live for an astonishingly long time, perhaps 100 years or more, and it can go for years without eating, its metabolism slowed almost to stillness in the cool, unchanging water. For centuries, when people found these creatures washed out of caves by floods, they thought they were baby dragons, the offspring of great beasts living deep in the mountains. Pale and strange and seemingly impossible, the Olms seem to belong to myth rather than biology. But it's real, a true cave dweller, perfectly suited to a world most living things could never survive, drifting slow and patient through the dark water, in no hurry, the way nothing in the cave is ever in a hurry. There are blind cave fish in many parts of the world, in underground rivers and flooded passages, each one independently arriving at the same pale, eyeless form, the dark sculpting them all in the same direction. There are cave salamanders, cave shrimp, cave crayfish, all of them ghost-colored and often blind. There are cave insects, beetles and crickets, and tiny springtails, with long sweeping antennae and slender legs, feeling their way through the dark. There are cave spiders that spin their webs across passages and wait in the blackness for whatever might wander past. Whole ecosystems exist down there, complete and self-contained, lineages that have been refining themselves for the underground for millions of years. But this raises the question we set aside earlier: what do they eat? If there's no sunlight, no plants, no photosynthesis, where does the energy come from? How does a deep cave ecosystem feed itself? And the answers are some of the most interesting in all of biology. In many caves, the answer comes from above, carried down by the comings and goings of the surface world. The bats are a major source. They feed in the world above, and they return to the cave to roost, and their droppings accumulate on the cave floor in great deposits called guano. This guano, rich in nutrients, becomes the foundation of an entire food web. Tiny organisms feed on it, and other creatures feed on them. And so the energy the bats gathered from the surface flows into the dark and sustains a community of life that never sees the sun. Floods, too, wash organic material down into caves, leaves and twigs, and the bodies of surface creatures, all of it food for the patient scavengers of the underground. The cave ecosystem, in these cases, is fed by the surface, fed by a slow rain of nutrients, trickling down from the bright world overhead into the dark world below. And yet there is another answer, stranger and more wonderful still, and it points to a kind of life that needs no sun at all, not even secondhand. In some caves, life is built not on sunlight, but on chemistry, on the energy locked in minerals and gases, drawn directly from the rock and the water of the earth itself. Let me tell you about one such place, because it changed how scientists thought about life entirely. There is a cave in Romania that was sealed off from the surface for millions of years. No light reached it. No water trickled in carrying food from above. No bats came and went. It was cut off, isolated, a hollow in the rock with no connection to the world we know. When scientists drilled down and finally entered it, they expected to find it dead, a sterile pocket of stagnant air and water. Instead, they found it teeming with life. Dozens of species, many of them found nowhere else on Earth, living in the warm, foul, oxygen-poor air of a cave that had been sealed away since before our ancestors walked upright. Pale, blind creatures, evolved in isolation across unimaginable spans of time, thriving in a place that had no contact with the sun-driven world above. How was this possible? The answer lay in the water and the air of the cave, which were rich in hydrogen sulfide, the gas that smells of rotten eggs, rising up from deep within the earth. And in that water lived microbes, bacteria, that could feed on the chemical energy in that gas. They didn't need sunlight. They drew their energy directly from the chemistry, building living tissue out of chemical reactions in the dark. These microbes formed mats and films on the surface of the water, and on those microbial mats fed tiny creatures, and on those creatures fed slightly larger ones, and so an entire food web rose up, an entire isolated ecosystem, founded not on the sun, but on the rock-born energy of the earth itself. It was a glimpse of how life might survive in places we'd assumed were impossible, in sealed caves, in the deep crust, perhaps even on other worlds, where the sun never reaches but the chemistry of the planet still flows. There are other caves like this, where the very acid that dissolves the limestone is not the gentle carbonic acid of rainwater, but sulfuric acid, formed when hydrogen sulfide rising from below meets water and oxygen near the surface. These caves are carved from the bottom up, dissolved by acid generated in their own depths, and they can be lined with strange formations and dripping colonies of microbes hanging in slimy strands from the ceiling, alive, feeding on the chemistry, building their lives in the dark from the raw materials of the earth. One famous cave in the American Southwest, a vast and gorgeous system of passages and chambers decorated with extraordinary crystal formations, is thought to have been dissolved this way, by sulfuric acid welling up from deep oil and gas deposits far below, eating away at the limestone over millions of years, creating a place of such delicate beauty that those who explore it move with extreme care, mapping every step to avoid disturbing formations that took ages beyond measure to grow. What all of this tells us, gently, as you rest, is that life is far more stubborn and far more inventive than we tend to assume. It does not require the bright surface world. It does not require the sun. Given energy in any form, even the faint chemical energy of gases seeping through stone, life will find a way to capture it and build itself in the dark. The caves are full of this hidden, patient, lightless life. Whole worlds of it, sealed beneath our feet, getting on with the business of living in conditions we would find unbearable, in a darkness that is, to them, simply home. Let's pause there for a moment, in that thought, and let it settle the way the silt settles in a still cave pool. Beneath you, beneath the place where you're resting tonight, the rock holds its hollows, and in some of those hollows, life is at work, slow, pale, patient life, feeling its way through the dark, asking nothing of the sun. The world is so much fuller than it seems. Even its emptiest-looking places, even its deepest darkness, are alive. Now I want to turn to one of the most remarkable things about caves, something that makes them precious to scientists in a way that has nothing to do with their beauty, though they are beautiful. Caves are time machines. They are archives. They keep records of the past with a fidelity and a patience that almost nothing else on Earth can match. And the records they keep can tell us about climates and conditions stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Remember the stalactites and stalagmites, growing drop by drop across the ages. As they grow, they don't just accumulate stone, they accumulate information. Each layer of mineral that a stalagmite lays down carries a chemical signature of the water that made it, and that water carries a signature of the climate of the surface at the moment it fell as rain and soaked down through the soil. When scientists slice a stalagmite open, they find it banded with layers, like the rings of a tree, each band a record of a span of time. And by reading the chemistry of those bands, the proportions of different forms of the same element locked into the mineral, they can reconstruct what the climate was like, season by season, century by century, going back tens of thousands of years and more. This is extraordinary when you sit with it. A single stalagmite, growing silently in the dark, no wider than your arm, can hold within it a continuous record of the rainfall and temperature and conditions of an entire region, reaching back further than written history, further than agriculture, deep into the ages of ice and warmth that came before us. The cave is a recording device that runs for hundreds of thousands of years without stopping, without anyone tending it, without anyone even knowing it's there. It simply keeps growing, keeps laying down its layers, keeps writing the climate of the world above into the chemistry of its stone. And then, ages later, someone enters the cave, takes a small sample, and reads the whole long story. The droughts and the wet years, the warm spells and the cold, the slow rhythms of the planet's climate, all of it preserved in a finger of mineral grown in the dark. Caves preserve other records too. The flooded passages and the dry chambers can hold the bones of creatures that fell in, or were washed in, or sheltered there, and died, preserved for ages in the cool, stable, protected conditions of the underground. Caves have given up the remains of animals long extinct, of creatures that lived in ages so different from our own that their world is almost unrecognizable. The cool, constant temperature, the protection from weather and sun and decay, makes caves natural preservers. What enters them, and is buried in their sediments or sealed in their formations, can last for an extraordinarily long time. Pollen, dust, the chemical traces of ancient fires, the bones of vanished beasts. The cave gathers it all and keeps it, faithfully, in the dark. A museum that no one curated, holding its collection across the ages until someone comes to read it. And among the things caves have preserved, none is more moving than the record of ourselves, because caves and humans go back a very long way, longer than almost anything else in our story. And the relationship between our species and these dark hollows in the rock is one of the deepest and oldest connections we have. For most of human history, caves were shelter. In a world without houses, without walls, without any made structures at all, a cave was one of the few places that offered real protection from the elements. The constant mild temperature that we noticed at the start, neither too hot nor too cold, made caves comfortable refuges in climates that swung to dangerous extremes. The solid rock kept out the wind and the rain and the snow. The single entrance could be defended, watched, kept warm with a fire. For our distant ancestors, and for other human species before and alongside us, caves were home. Not the deep dark zones, of course, but the entrances and the twilight zones, the sheltered mouths where a little light reached and the worst of the weather couldn't follow. Generation after generation sheltered in these places, lived and slept and ate and raised their children there, and left behind, in the layers of the cave floor, the traces of their lives. When archaeologists dig down through the sediments of an ancient cave that humans inhabited, they find those lives stacked in layers, the way the stalagmite stacks its years. Ashes from old fires, the bones of animals that were hunted and eaten, stone tools, shaped and sharpened and used and discarded, the debris of daily existence, accumulated over thousands of years of habitation, layer upon layer, each one a slice of time. A single cave might preserve a record of human life stretching back tens of thousands of years, a continuous occupation by people who never knew they were leaving a record, never imagined that someone would one day read their ashes and their bones and their broken tools and reconstruct, from those fragments, the shape of their existence. The cave kept it all, faithfully, in the cool and the dark, until we came to find it. But the deepest connection between humans and caves, the one that reaches straight into the heart and stays there, is not about shelter, it's about art. Because deep in certain caves, far back in the darkness, sometimes in passages that can only be reached by crawling and climbing through difficult terrain, our distant ancestors made some of the first and most powerful art that human beings have ever created. And it has waited there, in the dark, for tens of thousands of years. Imagine it, tens of thousands of years ago, in the depths of the last great age of ice, a human being takes a torch or a lamp of burning fat and ventures deep into a cave, far past the entrance, far past the twilight, into the true dark zone where no daylight has ever reached. They carry with them pigments, ground from minerals, red and black and ochre, and there, on the walls of the deep cave, by the flickering light of their small flame, they paint. They paint the animals of their world, horses, bison, lions, bears, deer, the great beasts they lived among and hunted and feared and revered. They paint them with astonishing skill, with movement and life and a sense of the animal so true that it can still take your breath away. They use the natural contours of the rock to give the figures shape and depth, so that a bulge in the wall becomes the swell of a bison's shoulder, a hollow becomes the curve of a flank. They blow pigment across their own hands pressed to the stone, leaving the outline of a human hand, a signature, a gesture across the ages that says, simply, "I was here," and then they leave, and the art remains, in the dark, in the cave's perfect preserving stillness, for tens of thousands of years. When these painted caves are rediscovered, the effect on those who enter is profound. To stand in a chamber deep underground and see, by lamplight, the animals painted there by human hands so long ago that the world itself was different, the ice sheets still vast across the north, the creatures depicted on the walls still alive in the world outside, is to feel the immense reach of time collapse into a single moment of recognition. These were people. They saw beauty. They wanted to make something, to capture the animals that filled their lives, to put their mark on the dark heart of the earth. And the cave kept their work safe across an abyss of time that we can barely comprehend, preserving the freshness of the pigment, the confidence of the lines, the print of the ancient hand, so that we, so impossibly distant from them, could stand before it and feel, across all those tens of thousands of years, the unmistakable presence of another human mind reaching out to us through the dark. The oldest of these cave paintings are older than you might imagine, older than the first farms by tens of thousands of years, older than the first cities by far more, made by people who lived in a world without writing, without metal, without any of the things we associate with civilization, and yet who carried within them the same impulse toward beauty and meaning that we carry still. The caves preserved this for us. The same cool, dark, stable conditions that preserve the climate records and the bones of vanished animals also preserved the first art, the first reaching of the human spirit toward something beyond mere survival. And it could only have survived in a cave. Anywhere on the surface, exposed to weather and sun and time, it would have faded and vanished long ago. Only in the deep dark, in the sealed and silent heart of the earth, could something so fragile last so long. The cave was the gallery, the darkness was the keeper, and the art waited, patiently, the way everything in the cave waits, until at last it was seen again. There's a thought I find myself returning to, gently, in the quiet of this hour. The deep cave is a place defined by darkness and silence and the absence of human presence, and yet some of the most deeply human things we have ever made are found precisely there, in the darkest and most hidden places, far from light and life. As though the impulse to make meaning drove our ancestors as deep into the earth as they could go, into the very places where survival had nothing to gain, simply to make their mark, to paint their animals, to leave their handprints on the stone. The caves hold that mystery along with everything else. Why so deep? Why in the dark? We can guess, but we don't truly know. And perhaps that not knowing is part of what makes it so moving. The cave keeps its secrets, even as it gives them up. Now let me take you on a tour, slowly, of some of the great caves of the world, the largest and longest and deepest and strangest, because the scale of these places is one of the gentlest wonders to fall asleep thinking about. The Earth's largest hollows are so vast, so far beyond the scale of human structures, that holding them in your mind is a soft and pleasant exercise in the immensity of the underground world. Consider the question of the longest cave, not a single chamber, but a connected system of passages, a labyrinth that winds and branches and loops back on itself through the limestone, mapped corridor by explorers who survey every turn. The longest known cave system in the world stretches for hundreds of miles of mapped passage, a maze so complex and so extensive that it's still being explored, still being added to, decade after decade, as surveyors push into passages no one has charted, connecting one section to another, slowly revealing the true scale of a system that may be larger than anyone yet knows. Hundreds of miles of passages, beneath the hills, in the dark, most of it never seen by anyone, all of it carved by water, over the long ages of the limestone's slow dissolving. You could walk for days inside it and never retrace your steps. You could become lost in it forever, and it's only the longest one we know of. There may be longer ones still hidden, unconnected, waiting for the passage that will reveal how vast they truly are. Consider the question of the deepest cave, the caves that plunge straight down into the earth, shaft after shaft, pitch after pitch, descending through the rock toward depths that test the limits of human endurance to reach. The deepest known caves descend more than 2 kilometers below their entrances, more than 1.5 miles straight down into the body of the earth. To explore them, cavers descend for days, rappelling down vertical shafts, squeezing through tight passages, crossing underground rivers, camping in chambers far below the surface, pushing deeper and deeper toward the bottom, which is often a flooded sump where the passage dips below water and continues on into the unexplored. These are among the most demanding expeditions on the planet, comparable to climbing the highest mountains, except inverted, except in darkness, except with the weight of 2 kilometers of rock pressing down overhead. And the people who undertake them do it to reach a place no one has ever been, the very bottom of one of the Earth's deepest accessible hollows, a place of total darkness and silence at the end of a journey down through the ages of the stone. Consider the question of the largest chamber, not the longest system or the deepest shaft, but the single biggest room, the most enormous continuous hollow space inside the Earth. There are chambers known that are so vast they could hold entire buildings, that could swallow a small town, that are so large their ceilings vanish into darkness beyond the reach of any light, so that explorers standing on the floor cannot see the roof and feel themselves to be not underground at all, but standing outside under a black and starless sky. To enter such a chamber is to confront a scale that the underground world rarely shows on the surface. A single room, hollowed out of solid rock by water over ages beyond counting, so large that the human mind struggles to take it in, sitting in perfect darkness in the heart of a mountain, complete and silent and almost entirely unknown. And then there are the caves of crystal, the caves of ice, the caves of glowing worms, whose threads light up the darkness like stars, the caves where rivers thunder, and the caves where the silence is so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat. There are caves that flood and drain with the tides, caves filled with the bones of ancient creatures, caves where the air is poisonous, and caves where it is sweet and cool. There are sea caves and lava caves and ice caves, and the great limestone caves with their endless decorated passages. The Earth holds an astonishing variety of hollows, each one shaped by its own particular patient process, each one holding its own kind of darkness and its own kind of silence. And the vast majority of them have never been entered, never been seen, never been named. They sit beneath the surface of the world, complete and finished and unknown, the secret architecture of the planet, waiting in the dark. I want to dwell, before we begin our slow return toward the surface, on that silence, because it's one of the things about caves that stays with people most deeply, and it's a fitting thing to rest in as the hour grows late. We think we know silence. We seek it out, value it, treasure the quiet moments in our noisy lives. But the silence of a deep cave is something else entirely, a silence so complete and so profound that most people have never experienced anything like it and find it almost overwhelming when they do. On the surface, there is always sound, even in the quietest place you can find. Even in the dead of night in the most remote wilderness, there is the whisper of moving air, the distant murmur of water, the small sounds of living things, the faint background hum of a world that never truly falls silent. We are so accustomed to this gentle wash of sound that we don't even notice it. It's the floor beneath our hearing, always there. But in the deep cave, far from any entrance, in still air, with no flowing water nearby, that floor falls away. The silence is total. There is no wind, because the air is still. There are no animals stirring, or if there are, they make no sound. There is nothing, and in that nothing, your own body becomes loud. You hear your breathing, suddenly enormous. You hear your heart beating, a sound you've carried your whole life without ever truly hearing it. You hear the blood moving in your ears. The cave is so silent that the only sound left is you, the quiet machinery of your own living, normally drowned out by the world, here revealed in the perfect stillness of the deep dark. People who experience this silence describe it as one of the most profound sensations of their lives. It can be peaceful, deeply and almost unbearably peaceful, a stillness more complete than anything the surface world offers, and it can be disorienting, even frightening, because we are not built for it, because some part of us listens always for the sounds of the world and grows uneasy when there are none. But mostly, for those who come to know it, the silence of the deep cave is a kind of gift, a pure and ancient quiet, undisturbed by anything, the natural silence of the earth's interior, which has been silent in just this way for ages beyond reckoning, long before there were ears to hear it or break it. And the darkness, paired with that silence, completes the experience of the deep cave in a way that touches something very old in us. We spoke earlier of how total the darkness is, how it makes no difference whether your eyes are open or closed. Now imagine that darkness joined to that silence. No light, no sound, no movement of air, no change of temperature. The senses, which spend our whole lives flooded with input, suddenly have nothing to work with, nothing to see, nothing to hear, nothing to feel, but the cool, still air and the stone beneath you. It's a kind of sensory rest unlike anything the surface can offer, a return to a stillness so deep it predates life itself. The interior of the earth, dark and silent and still, the way it has always been, the way it was before there was anything to disturb it, the way it will be long after we are gone. There's a peace in that, I think, and a fitting one for this hour. The cave doesn't need us. It doesn't need light or sound or attention. It has held its darkness and its silence with perfect patience across spans of time we can barely imagine, and it will go on holding them. The stalactites will keep growing, drop by drop, in the dark. The pale, blind creatures will keep feeling their way through the still water. The underground rivers will keep flowing through passages no one has seen, and the silence will keep its long, deep, ancient quiet undisturbed, while the bright, noisy world goes on above, while we live our brief and busy lives, while you rest here tonight on the thin surface of a planet that is hollow and dark and silent within. Before we begin our slow return, let me show you a few more of the cave's hidden wonders, because the night is still deep, and there's no reason to hurry, and some of the gentlest marvels of the underground are the ones we haven't touched yet. I told you, a little while ago, that the deep cave is a place of perfect darkness, that no light reaches it, that it is dark in a way the surface world almost never is. And that's true for nearly all caves, nearly all of the time. But there is a kind of cave where light returns to the darkness, not the light of the sun, but a soft, living light made by the creatures themselves. In certain caves, in particular parts of the world, the ceilings of the deep passages glow, not brightly, not all at once, but in a scattering of tiny blue-green points, hundreds of them, thousands of them, spread across the darkness overhead like stars. To enter such a cave and look up is to see, in the heart of the earth, a kind of night sky, an underground firmament of pale living light, glimmering in the absolute dark. These lights are made by glowworms, the larvae of a particular kind of fly, which live on the ceilings of these caves and produce a faint, steady, bluish glow from their bodies. They glow to lure their prey, small insects that drift through the cave or hatch from the underground stream below, drawn upward toward the light the way moths are drawn to a flame. The glowworms hang fine silken threads down from the ceiling, sticky lines that trail in the dark, and the glowing larvae wait at the top, patient and luminous, for an insect to be drawn in and caught. It's a quiet kind of hunting, slow and still, perfectly suited to the cave, and the effect, for anyone who comes to see it, is one of the most beautiful sights in all the underground world. A river of black water flowing silently through the passage, and above it, a galaxy of soft blue lights, reflected in the still surface below, so that you drift through the dark, suspended between two skies, the real glowing ceiling above, and its mirror image in the water beneath, surrounded on all sides by living stars, in absolute silence, in the heart of the earth. There's something so gentle about that, so improbable and so lovely, that it seems almost like a dream. Life, finding its way even into the deepest dark and making light there, making the darkness beautiful. The cave, which has held its blackness for ages beyond counting, given a soft, glowing ceiling by tiny, patient creatures hanging in the still air, fishing with light in the dark. It's the kind of thing you could fall asleep imagining, drifting on black water beneath a sky of living stars, in a silence so complete that the only sound is the faint drip of water somewhere far off in the dark. And speaking of life in the cave, I want to return for a moment to the bats, because their lives in the underground are among the most extraordinary and most beautiful, and because the great gatherings of bats in certain caves are one of nature's quiet spectacles. We mentioned them earlier, the bats that roost in caves and feed in the world above. But in some caves, the numbers are staggering, almost beyond belief. There are caves where bats gather not in dozens or hundreds, but in millions, packed onto the ceilings of vast chambers, in such density that the rock itself seems to be made of them, a living, breathing, faintly murmuring blanket of warm bodies covering the stone overhead, the largest gatherings of mammals anywhere on the planet, hidden away in the dark. By day, they sleep, hanging upside down in the cool, stable air of the cave, conserving their energy, packed together for warmth. And at dusk, something remarkable happens. As the light fades outside, the bats begin to stir, to wake, to drop from the ceiling and take wing, and they pour out of the cave entrance in an enormous spiraling column, a river of bats flowing up into the darkening sky, millions of them, streaming out to feed on the insects of the night. The emergence can take hours, an unbroken torrent of wings rising from the mouth of the cave, swirling up into the dusk, spreading out across the land to hunt. And before dawn, they return, pouring back down into the dark, settling onto the ceiling again, folding their wings, falling still, until the next nightfall calls them out once more. This rhythm, out at dusk and back before dawn, repeated night after night, season after season, brings the energy of the surface world down into the cave in the form of guano, feeding the whole hidden ecosystem of the dark, the foundation on which so much underground life is built. The bats are the bridge between the bright world and the dark one, carrying the sun's energy, at one remove, into the lightless depths. There's a tenderness in the lives of these creatures, sleeping through the bright hours in the safe, cool dark, waking to the night, navigating the blackness not by sight but by sound, sending out their calls and listening for the echoes, building a picture of the world from sound the way the blind cavefish builds a picture from touch and current. The cave shelters them, holds them, keeps them cool and safe and still through the day, and they repay it by feeding its hidden life. It's a quiet partnership, ancient and steady, going on in the dark beneath the surface of the world, night after night, for ages. Let me take you, too, into the caves of ice and color, because we passed them quickly before, and they deserve a slower look. The ice caves we spoke of, carved by meltwater through the bodies of glaciers, are walls of blue, a deep, glowing, otherworldly blue, the blue of ancient compressed ice, which absorbs the red and yellow of light and lets only the blue pass through, so that the cave seems lit from within by a cold sapphire glow. The walls are smooth and translucent, sculpted by the flowing water into curves and ripples and flutes, and where the light filters down through the ice above, it spreads through the whole cave in a soft, shifting underwater blue, as if you were standing inside a frozen wave. These caves are fragile and fleeting, always melting and reforming, here for a season and gone. But for the brief time they exist, they are among the most beautiful spaces on Earth, and unlike the limestone caves, they are not dark. They glow. They hold the light of the sky, filtered through ages of compressed snow, and turn it that deep, impossible blue. And even the lightless limestone caves are not without color, though we tend to imagine them in shades of gray. The formations within them can be tinted with every warm color of the earth. The minerals dissolved in the water carry traces of iron and other elements, and as they're deposited, they stain the stone. Stalactites and flowstones, banded with cream and honey and amber, and deep red rust, layered like the rings of a tree, each band a record of the changing chemistry of the water across the ages. Pure white formations, where the mineral is clean, glowing translucent in the lamplight. Deep reds and oranges, where iron has stained the stone. The cave, when light is finally brought to it, reveals itself as a place of subtle and varied color, the warm earth tones of mineral and time, painted across the formations by the slow, patient work of the dripping water, in a darkness that hid those colors for ages, until someone came with a lamp to see them. There's a deeper kind of life in the underground, too, that I want to mention gently, because it's one of the most astonishing discoveries of recent times and a lovely thing to rest your mind on. We've talked about the creatures of the caves, the pale blind fish, and the ghostly amphibians, and the patient insects. But beyond the caves themselves, deeper still, within the solid rock, in the tiny pores and cracks and films of water that thread through the stone, there is life. Microscopic life, bacteria and other tiny organisms, living deep within the Earth's crust, far below any cave, in the rock itself, in conditions of heat and pressure and darkness that we once thought no life could possibly endure. They live slowly, almost unimaginably slowly, their lives stretched out across spans of time that dwarf our own, some of them perhaps dividing only once in centuries, getting their energy from the chemistry of the rock and the water, asking nothing of the sun, going about their patient existence in the deep, dark interior of the planet. This hidden life, this deep biosphere, may be enormous. Some scientists believe that the total mass of living things deep within the Earth's crust may rival the mass of all the life on the surface, that beneath our feet, in the rock, there is a whole shadow biosphere of slow, patient microbes, living in the dark, in the stone, in conditions of perfect stillness and deep time. We walk on the surface, in the light, busy and quick and bright, and beneath us, in the silent rock, life endures in a register so slow and so deep that we can scarcely conceive of it, getting on with its quiet business in the dark, as it has perhaps since life on Earth began. The caves are only the visible edge of this hidden world, the places where the deep, dark interior comes close enough to the surface for us to enter. But the dark living earth extends far beyond them, down into the rock, into a stillness and a patience and a darkness deeper than any cave. Now let me turn, before we rise, to the place that caves hold in the human imagination, because we've spoken of how our ancestors sheltered in caves and painted in them, but the relationship goes deeper still, into the stories and the dreams and the meanings that human beings have always woven around these dark hollows in the earth. For as long as there have been people, caves have been thresholds, doorways, places where the ordinary world ends and something else begins. They lead down, into the dark, into the unknown, into the body of the earth, and almost every human culture has found in them a symbol of the journey beyond the world we know. So many of the old stories of the world place the realm of the dead, the underworld, beneath the ground, reached through a cave or a deep descent into the earth. The cave became the doorway to that other world, the place where the living might pass, in story or in spirit, into the realm of the dead and return again, changed. The descent into the cave became a descent into mystery, into transformation, into the deep places of the self, as much as the deep places of the earth. To go down into the dark and come back up into the light became one of the oldest and most powerful patterns in human storytelling, a journey of death and return, of loss and recovery, of facing the darkness and emerging from it. And it's no accident that this pattern attached itself to caves, because caves are where the descent into darkness is real and physical, where you can truly leave the lighted world behind and walk down into the silent dark of the earth's interior. Caves were sacred places too, in countless cultures, places of ritual and pilgrimage, where people went to seek visions, to leave offerings, to mark the great passages of life, to come close to whatever powers they believed dwelt in the deep places of the world. The cave was the meeting point between the human world and the other world, the seen and the unseen, the surface and the depths. People crawled into them, painted in them, prayed in them, buried their dead in them, left the traces of their reverence in the dark. And the caves, in their patient way, kept those traces, the way they keep everything, in the cool and the dark and the stillness, so that we can still find them, ages later, and feel the weight of the meaning our ancestors poured into these hidden hollows in the earth. There's a reason caves move us so deeply, I think. A reason they appear again and again in our oldest stories and our deepest dreams. We are surface creatures, made for the light, and the dark beneath the ground is the great unknown, the place we cannot see, the place that holds whatever we most fear and whatever we most long for. To descend into a cave is to descend into that unknown, willingly, into the silence and the dark, and to find there not nothing, but something, beauty, mystery, the slow, patient work of water and time, the traces of those who came before. The cave gives the unknown a shape we can enter, a darkness we can walk into and return from. And perhaps that's part of why people have always been drawn to go down, why some people still are, why they crawl and climb and dive into the deep, dark places of the earth, to enter the unknown and come back, to touch the mystery and return to the light. Because there have always been people who went down, even before there was any reason to, even before there was science or sport, or any purpose beyond the going itself. There were people who ventured deep into the caves, past the shelter of the entrance, into the true dark zone where there was nothing to gain, simply to see what was there. We don't fully know why. We found their footprints, sometimes, preserved in the mud of deep passages, the prints of human feet that walked into the dark ages ago. Sometimes, the small prints of children, going down into places that served no practical purpose, lit only by the small flame of a torch or a lamp. They went down into the dark, our distant ancestors, and walked through the silent passages, and we can only guess at what drew them. Curiosity, perhaps, reverence, the same pull that draws people still, the deep human need to know what lies beyond the edge of the known, to go into the dark and find out. And in more recent times, that pull became a kind of devotion. People began to explore caves systematically, to map them, to push deeper and farther, to chart the hidden passages and connect one system to another and discover what the underground world truly contained. It became one of the last great frontiers of exploration, perhaps the last one on Earth that an ordinary person could still reach, because while the mountains have been climbed and the poles have been reached and the maps of the surface have been filled in, the caves remain, vast stretches of them, unexplored, unmapped, unknown. There are passages no one has ever walked, chambers no one has ever seen, whole cave systems waiting to be discovered, beneath the surface of a planet we think of as thoroughly explored. And so people still go down, still squeeze through tight passages, and rappel down vertical shafts, and dive through flooded sumps, into the dark, to be the first to see what's there, to add another corridor to the map, to push the frontier a little farther into the unknown heart of the earth. It's a strange and quiet kind of exploration, done in darkness, in silence, far from any witness, in places so hidden that the discoveries are known only to the few who make them. There's no glory in it, no crowd, no view from a summit, just the dark, and the silence, and the stone, and the slow, patient work of going deeper, of mapping the hollows, of learning the shape of the underground world one passage at a time. The people who do it speak of it with a kind of love, the love of the dark and the quiet and the unknown, the love of being in a place no one has ever been, the love of the cave itself, its formations and its silence and its deep, ancient stillness. They go down into the dark, and something in the dark calls to them, and they answer, and they come back changed, carrying the silence and the wonder of the deep places up with them into the light. And all the while, beneath everything, there is the time, the deep, vast, almost unthinkable time that the caves embody more completely than almost anything else on Earth. I keep returning to it, gently, Because it's the thing that lies beneath all the rest, the foundation of every wonder we've touched tonight. The limestone formed at the bottom of ancient seas, grain by grain, over millions of years. The dissolving of the rock, atom by atom, over hundreds of thousands of years more. The growth of the formations, drop by drop, across spans of time that make our lifetimes vanish into nothing. The caves are made of time. They are time, given a shape we can enter, time made into stone and hollow and silence. To stand in a deep cave is to stand inside an immensity of time. The chamber around you was begun before there were humans, before there were the creatures we think of as ancient. In a world so distant it would be unrecognizable. The stalactite hanging above you has been growing, drop by drop, since before the first cities, perhaps since before our species existed. The water dripping from its tip will add a layer tonight. While you sleep, an almost invisible film of mineral. One more thin page in a record that began an unimaginable time ago and will continue for an unimaginable time to come. The cave does not measure time in years, or centuries, or even in the lifetimes of species. It measures time in the slow accumulation of stone, in the patient subtraction of rock, in increments so small and spans so vast that the human mind can only stand at the edge of them and feel the immensity open out below, like standing at the lip of a great dark shaft and feeling the depth beneath your feet. And there's a peace in that immensity, I find, especially at this hour, as sleep draws near. Our lives are so brief, so busy, so full of urgency and worry, and the cave knows nothing of any of it. The cave keeps its own time, the deep, slow time of stone and water, indifferent to our hurry, untroubled by our cares, going on in the dark with a patience that puts all our anxieties into a gentler perspective. The worries of the day, the things that pressed on you this evening, the small and large troubles of a human life, are nothing to the cave, less than nothing, a flicker too brief to register in the long, slow growth of the stone. And there's comfort in that, in being small before something so vast and so patient, in resting, for a while, in the shadow of deep time, letting the cave's immense and ancient calm settle over you like the cool, still air of the deep passages. So let the time of the cave be your time for tonight. The slow time, the deep time, the patient time of water and stone. Let your breathing slow to match it. Let your thoughts settle the way the silt settles in a still cave pool, drifting down, slowly, until the water is clear and calm. There's no hurry. The cave has all the time in the world, and tonight, so do you. Nothing to do, nowhere to be, nothing to solve or finish or worry over. Just the slow descent into rest, the gentle settling into the dark and the quiet, the way the water settles, the way the stone grows, the way the cave keeps its long, patient silence beneath the surface of the world. Let's begin, gently, to make our way back. Not because the cave is finished with us, but because the hour is late and sleep is near, and it's a good thing to drift toward it slowly, the way we descended slowly at the start. Picture yourself turning, now, in the deep dark, and beginning the long, quiet walk back toward the surface. There's no hurry. The passage is the same one we came down, the formations the same, the silence the same, but now we're rising, gradually, back toward the world of light. As we go, think about all that we've passed through, the entrance where the cave breathed its cool breath into the ferns, the dissolving of limestone, atom by atom, over ages, by the gentle acid of rainwater, hollowing out the heart of the stone, the slow architecture of dripstone, the stalactites reaching down and the stalagmites reaching up, the draperies and the flowstones and the crystal chambers, all built by water and time in perfect darkness, the hidden rivers running through the rock, the pale blind creatures feeling their way through a world without light, fed by the chemistry of the earth itself, the caves as archives, holding the climate of ages in the layers of their stone, holding the bones of vanished beasts, holding the first art our species ever made, deep in the dark where it could last. The great systems, the longest and the deepest and the largest, most of them unseen. The silence, more profound than any silence above. The darkness, older than eyes. All of that is beneath us, always, beneath the surface of the world, beneath wherever you happen to be tonight. The earth is not solid beneath our feet, not entirely. It's honeycombed with hollows, threaded with passages, full of secret rooms and hidden rivers and ancient silent spaces that have been forming since long before we arrived, and will go on forming long after we're gone. We live on the surface, in the light and the noise, and we rarely think about the dark, patient world below. But it's there. It's always there, and there's something deeply comforting in that, I find, as the night settles in. The slow, quiet, unhurried persistence of the underground world, building its formations drop by drop, keeping its records, holding its silence, asking nothing of us, going on in the dark with the infinite patience of stone and water and time. The water is still seeping down, even now, through the rock beneath you, faintly acidic, dissolving the limestone grain by grain, finding its slow way through the passages, dripping into hidden chambers, leaving its tiny rings of mineral, building the formations of caves that may not be fully formed for another 100,000 years. The process never stops. It's happening right now, in the dark, beneath the place where you rest. The slow making of hollows, and the slow building of stone, the endless patient work of the earth, shaping its own quiet interior, the way it has for ages and ages, the way it will for ages more. And the caves that exist now, the ones already hollowed and decorated and silent, are waiting, the way they always wait. Some of them have entrances, and people venture in, and explore, and map, and marvel. Most of them have no entrance at all, no door to the world above, and they sit sealed in perfect darkness, complete and finished and unseen, holding their silence and their stillness with a patience beyond our understanding. They don't need to be seen. They simply are, hollow and dark and quiet in the body of the earth, the secret architecture of the planet, the oldest hollows, keeping their long silence beneath the bright and busy surface of the world. We've nearly reached the entrance now. Ahead, in the dark, a faint paleness, the first hint of the surface light filtering back into the passage, the twilight zone again, the gray return of the world we left behind. The temperature begins, just barely, to shift. The silence loosens, a whisper of air, a far distant sound. We've been deep, and now we're rising. And the surface world is coming back to meet us, soft and dim, the way the dawn comes back after the longest night. But you don't need to go all the way out, not tonight. You can stay here, in the gentle threshold between the dark cave and the lighted world, in the cool, still air, in the quiet. You can let the descent we made together carry you the rest of the way, not back up into the bright, noisy surface, but down, softly, into sleep, which is its own kind of cave, its own dark and silent and restful place, where the cares of the day dissolve the way limestone dissolves, slowly and gently and completely, leaving you hollow and peaceful and at rest. So let your breathing stay slow, the way it's been. Let your body stay heavy and still, the way the deep cave is still. Let the darkness behind your eyes be the soft, complete, ancient darkness of the underground, the darkness that asks nothing of you, the darkness that has always been there and always will be, patient and quiet and deep. The cave is below you, holding its silence. The water is seeping down, doing its slow work. The formations are growing, drop by drop, in the dark. And you are here, on the surface, safe and warm, and ready for sleep, resting on the thin, bright skin of a planet that is hollow and dark and silent within, full of secret rooms and hidden rivers, and the oldest quiet in the world. And with that, we'll leave our slow descent here. If you found a little peace in this journey down into the dark, you might consider staying with us for more of these quiet wanderings through the hidden corners of the earth. A like or a subscribe helps others find their way here too, but only if it feels right to you. For now, there's nothing left to do but rest. Let the cave keep its silence below. Let the night keep its quiet above, and let yourself drift down, slowly, gently, into the deep and patient dark of sleep. Good night, and may your rest be as deep and as still and as untroubled as the oldest hollows of the earth.